Subscribe before the truth disappears, because in here, paperwork can kill you faster than a blade. The first alarm hit at 4:17 p.m., right when the yard should have been winding down into the last controlled movements of the day. It started as a single, sharp electronic wail that bounced off concrete and razor wire, then multiplied as doors sealed in sequence, steel slamming steel, the sound traveling the way thunder travels through canyons. On the south yard of Red River State Correctional Complex, men froze mid-step. A basketball rolled unattended toward the fence line and stopped against a patched seam of asphalt. A cluster near the chin-up bars scattered, not in panic, something colder than that, like animals that knew which direction the storm always came from. By the time the second siren joined the first, a run had already started. He came out of the shadow of the weight pile, moving too fast for a place built to make speed useless. His pants sagged, hands empty, eyes locked on the maintenance corridor gate that cut between the yard and the service spine of the prison. Behind him, bodies churned, one man stumbling backward, another folding down to his knees, officers shouting commands that dissolved into the high-pitched alarm and the roar of 100 voices. It wasn't a riot the way movies sell it. There was no grand surge, no single enemy to point at. It was quick and surgical, like a switch had been flipped and only a few men knew where to stand when the light changed. The runner hit the corridor gate. It was supposed to be locked. He yanked once, hard, and it gave. That detail, small, nearly invisible in the chaos, was the part people wouldn't stop talking about later. Inside the service corridor, the air changed immediately. The yard smelled like sweat and sun-baked concrete. The spine smelled like bleach, stale humidity, and the faint metallic tang of old pipes. Fluorescent lights flickered in narrow rectangles overhead. His boots slapped the floor as he cut left, toward the laundry wing. Then the power dipped, just a blink, and somewhere in the darkness ahead, a door shut with the quiet confidence of something that had been timed. When officers finally flooded into the corridor in stacked formation, radios crackling, the runner was gone. Not hiding, not cornered. Gone. Red River was the kind of place politicians toured in clean shoes once every few years to prove they'd been tough on crime. A broad, low complex sprawled under a hard sky, surrounded by fields that looked empty until a wind line ran across them like a hand smoothing fabric. The prison's bones were old, expanded in hurried phases, new wings stitched onto older ones, corridors that didn't quite align, utility chases that weren't on the public maps. It housed men serving long sentences, men serving short ones, and men who didn't know what they were serving because their appeals were still crawling through the system, like insects trapped in amber. It also housed organizations that didn't exist on any official roster. Most people on the outside only knew the celebrity gangs, the names that made headlines, the ones whispered on cable news like brand labels. But inside state prisons like Red River, reputation wasn't always the biggest weapon. The most dangerous influence often belonged to smaller, quieter groups. Tight affiliations built around region, language, shared transit routes, hometown loyalties, and the simple math of who could move what, where, and through whom. At Red River, the Paisas were a presence that felt like infrastructure. They didn't need loud tattoos or yard theatrics. They flowed through the kitchens, the laundry lines, the cleaning crews, the jobs that touched every unit and every male. They understood schedules and inventory the way a locksmith understands tumblers. If a box went missing, if a kitchen label changed, if a mop bucket arrived heavier than it should have, it didn't happen by accident. The Texas Chicano Brotherhood didn't advertise either, but everyone knew which tables belonged to them in the chow hall and which corners of the yard carried their gravity. They had a way of making rules feel natural. New men learn quickly where to stand, who not to look at, what not to borrow, and how to keep their mouths shut when someone asked the wrong question. And then there were the Border Brothers, less talked about in public, more unpredictable in practice. A bridge crew, a connector crew, men with ties that didn't always fit tidy categories, capable of moving between circles when others couldn't, turning a personal dispute into an institutional problem with a few murmured words. On paper, those names might have looked like scattered cliques. In motion, they behaved like an economy. It was into that economy that Evan Carver arrived. He stepped off the transport bus 3 weeks before the alarm, wearing the blank stare of a man determined to act like he'd seen worse. Mid-30s, athletic without being bulky, the kind of build that came from working with his hands. His file said property crimes, financial fraud, parole violations, nothing that sounded like it belonged in a place like Red River's South Unit. But prisons didn't run purely on the severity of the charge. They ran on the value of the person. Carver had value the moment he arrived, and not because he was a fighter. It started with rumors that moved faster than any official intake process. A man in holding swore Carver had outside money. A clerk in receiving overheard him asking about protecting an account. Another inmate watched Carver at commissary, counting twice, careful, like he'd learned to mistrust numbers. By day 2, Carver got approached near the phones. It wasn't dramatic, no circle closing in, no cinematic threats. Just a shoulder-to-shoulder pause, a voice low enough to blend into the ambient noise of trapped lives. A tax was explained, a simple tithe for staying unbothered. A promise that if he paid, nothing would happen. No theft, no accidents, no manufactured debts. The same offer every smart gang made to every new man who looked like a potential resource. Carver nodded like he understood. Then he didn't pay. He wasn't reckless. He didn't mouth off. He didn't pick fights. He simply moved like someone who believed discipline and silence were enough to get through. The prison taught him otherwise in small lessons. His soap disappeared the first week. Then his state-issued stakers. Then a card from his legal mail arrived torn open at the seam. He started waking up before lights on, sitting upright on his bunk with his hands clasped together, staring into the dark while his cellmate breathed easy beside him. By the second week, he stopped going to the phones, as if withdrawing from the world could make him less reachable. But prison economies don't allow neutrality for long. If you don't choose a lane, someone chooses it for you. The day before the alarm, Carver got assigned to laundry. It sounded like a downgrade. Hot air, lint, repetitive motions. But laundry touched everyone. Clothes traveled between units, bed sheets moved, towels, jumpsuits. The work detail ran through service corridors that most inmates never saw, past doors labeled authorized personnel only, past utility cages full of tools that could be turned into currency. Carver's first shift was uneventful. He learned the rhythm, the carts, the scanners, the clockwork of bodies turning loops. He kept his head down. He didn't stare at anyone. He didn't talk. But people noticed what he noticed. One older inmate on the line, quiet, tattooed, eyes like a man who'd spent years studying exits, watched Carver clock the position of cameras without thinking, watched him look at a locked door, and then an hour later glance back as if checking whether it was locked the same way. That night, Carver didn't eat. He sat at the end of the chow hall, food cooling in front of him, eyes fixed on a point past everyone, toward the far wall where kitchen workers moved in and out like ghosts. When the lights dimmed for the unit count later, he was seen standing at his cell bars, knuckles white, listening to the darkness. Then came the next day. Yard movement, alarm, a gate that shouldn't have opened. And after the lockdown settled, after the yard got stripped and searched, after men got corralled back into their cubes and the building went into that humming, tense silence that follows disorder, the staff started counting bodies. Everything in prison starts with count. In the South Unit, the numbers didn't match.
At first, it looked like a routine discrepancy. Someone in medical, someone in segregation, a paperwork lag. Those happen. But Carver's name sat where it shouldn't, like a loose tooth. His bunk was made. His shoes were lined up under the bed. His rolled towels were stacked with strange care, as if someone had arranged them to look untouched. A paperback sat face down on his pillow. The sink was dry, the toilet clean. It looked staged. On the unit kiosk, his commissary balance showed a withdrawal that morning, nearly drained. A neat series of small charges, nothing dramatic, just enough to look normal if you didn't know his habits. By evening, a correctional supervisor pulled up Carver's movement history. The screen scrolled, line after line of timestamps and locations. And there it was, a recorded transfer out of Red River at 4:19 p.m., 2 minutes after the first alarm. Destination: medical transport, external. It made no sense. No ambulance had entered, no paperwork had been filed with the gate, no hospital had logged his arrival. Yet the system insisted he had left. In a building where nothing moved without a key, where every door had a number, where every body was supposed to be accounted for, Evan Carver had vanished, cleanly enough that the computer believed it. Later that night, in receiving, an evidence property bag was opened that had been logged under Carver's inmate number, sealed, initialed, and dated with that same 4:19 p.m. timestamp. Inside was a single laminated prison ID card. It had Evan Carver's name. It had Evan Carver's inmate number, but the photo wasn't Evan Carver. And in the bottom right corner, where the approving clerk's code should correspond to a living employee, the system displayed an authorization ID that belonged to someone who had died 2 years earlier. The prison went quiet in a way it never truly went quiet. Because whoever moved Carver out hadn't just opened a gate. They reached into the bones of the place and rewritten reality.
By sunrise, Red River felt less like a prison and more like a machine that had swallowed a screw and kept turning anyway. The lights still clicked on at the same time. The same doors still buzzed. The same breakfasts still slid through slots on plastic trays. But everything moved with a new stiffness, as if the building itself had become cautious. Men spoke in shorter sentences. Footsteps in the tier carried farther. Even laughter, rare on a normal day, disappeared completely, replaced by the steady, nervous noise of bodies waiting for the next unexpected procedure. Lockdown didn't end after one count. It deepened. The South unit stayed sealed while staff ran another count, and then another. Radios kept chirping in clipped, coded bursts. Keys clinked. Boots paced. The air smelled like disinfectant and overheated wiring. Doors that usually opened with routine indifference now opened like threats. Inside the cells, men sat on bunks and watched the small slice of hallway visible through the bars. Some prayed. Some stared. Some performed calmness like a trick, careful not to display interest in anything that might be interpreted as knowledge. Because a disappearance like this didn't just unsettle staff. It destabilized the prison's economy. Evan Carver had arrived as a quiet variable. He vanished as a dangerous equation. The first ripple hit commissary. That morning, a list printed out of the kiosk, purchases tied to Carver's inmate number, neatly spaced, almost thoughtful. The charges weren't wild. Protein packs, instant coffee, phone minutes, hygiene bundles, the kind of spending that could be written off as a new man getting organized, except it happened all at once, minutes before the alarms, as though someone had tried to empty his account while there was still time. When commissary was called off because of the lockdown, the list became currency on its own. Men traded glances over it. It passed through hands without anyone being seen passing it. It traveled from the day room to the tier, to the showers and back, as if the paper carried heat. Inside Red River, money didn't just buy comfort. It bought position. It bought permission. And permission, once granted, could be revoked like a light switch. The Paisas absorbed the news first, the way they absorbed most operational disruptions. Quietly, efficiently, with a kind of patient calculation. Their influence wasn't built on theatrical domination. It lived in the daily logistics that kept the prison breathing. Kitchen shifts, cleaning crews, laundry carts, the subtle manipulation of who got assigned to which detail. In the laundry wing, the cart sat idle under flickering fluorescents, piled with sheets and state-issued uniforms that smelled like detergent and old sweat. Men stood around with their hands folded in front of them, waiting for someone to tell them the next move. No one did. The Texas Chicano Brotherhood reacted differently. Their authority depended on visible stability, on the sense that they could control not only men, but the mood of a place. A disappearance that clean, paired with a system record that claimed Carver had left through an external medical transport, threatened that stability in a way a fight never could. You could punish a fight, you could discipline a riot, but you couldn't easily punish a hole in reality. And the Border Brothers, always the connectors, always the unpredictable bridge, began moving in the negative space, where uncertainty created opportunity. They didn't need to claim anything. They only needed others to believe they might have claimed it. By midday, whispers turned into patterns. A brown paper bag appeared behind a loose ceiling tile in the South Unit showers, held there with soap residue and desperation. Inside were 2 wrapped protein bars and a folded handwritten note, the letters pressed hard into the paper as if the writer had been shaking. It didn't say much. Just a time, a place, and a single line. He didn't go out. He went under. No one could prove who had written it. No one could prove who found it. But within hours, men on different tiers began glancing at the floor drains in the showers and the narrow maintenance panels along the baseboards with a kind of superstitious dread. Under meant tunnels. Under meant chases. Under meant things the prison didn't talk about. And then, as if the building wanted to confirm the fear, a maintenance hatch in the service spine was found unsealed. It was a small thing. 2 screws loosened, a faint scratch mark on the paint, a hinge that didn't sit perfectly flush, but in a place designed to make every barrier absolute, tiny failures became enormous. The prison responded the only way it could, by tightening. Cells were searched at random, but never truly at random. Men were told to strip their bunks and stand facing walls. Clothing was shaken out. Mattresses were bent. Toiletries dumped. Every item you owned, a spoon, a photo, a letter, was briefly transformed into evidence. That is when the second ripple hit. Something went missing that wasn't supposed to be in anyone's possession at all. A clipboard vanished from the medical transport office. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't locked in a safe. It sat in the kind of room most inmates never saw, near a row of file cabinets and a dusty printer that jammed constantly. The clipboard held the day's transfer list, routine details, scheduled movements, outside facility runs. In theory, it was dull. In practice, it was a map. When the staff noticed it was gone, they didn't announce it. They didn't want to create panic. They simply stopped making eye contact with one another and began moving in sharper angles. On the units, inmates didn't need an announcement. They could feel the change. In the afternoon, the yard reopened for a limited release, a concession to the pressure building inside the blocks. Men stepped into the sun like divers surface, slow, wary, eyes adjusting. The chain-link fences shimmered in heat. The guard towers watched without blinking. Carver's name wasn't spoken openly. It didn't need to be. The absence itself became a presence. Near the far basketball court, a group clustered around a man everyone called Chewy, not because he was a leader in any official sense, but because people looked at him when they needed reality translated. He stood with his hands behind his back, posture relaxed, face unreadable, and listened while others spoke in low tones. Across the yard, a Paisa-affiliated crew held their usual space near the pull-up bars, pretending to stretch, pretending to talk about nothing. Their gaze tracked movement like code. And along the perimeter, near the walking track, a loose line of Border Brothers drifted like smoke, not stopping anywhere, always near enough to be overheard, never close enough to be confronted. That was when the pressure snapped into action. A young inmate named Maurice Mo Harlan, newer than Carver, thinner, with the kind of nervous energy that drew predators, broke from the track and walked too fast towards the benches. His head kept turning as if something was chasing him that no one else could see. He reached the benches, leaned in, and said something quick to Chewy. Chewy didn't react like someone hearing gossip. He reacted like someone hearing a deadline. Within minutes, the yard rearranged. Men shifted positions. Conversations died mid-sentence. A weight bar clanged in the distance, and then stopped. The living geometry of the yard changed into something that looked casual from the towers and felt lethal from the ground. Chewy turned to leave. He didn't get far.
2 inmates intercepted him, not with violence, not with visible force, just with bodies placed in the right angles, steering him toward the concrete corner where the sun didn't reach. Their hands remained low, their expressions remained calm. Mo tried to pivot away, and another man stepped into the path. A fourth presence appeared behind him. There were no punches, no weapons flashed, not even raised voices. Just a moment where Mo's shoulders tightened, his chin dipped, and the color drained from his face, as if he'd finally understood the price of saying the wrong thing to the wrong person. He was guided, softly but firmly, toward the gate leading back into the unit. From the tower, it looked like nothing. From the yard, it looked like a kidnapping without the drama. That night, Mo didn't return to his bunk. His cellmate waited through count, then through the next count, then sat awake in the glow of the hallway light leaking across the floor. The bed across from him remained perfectly made, untouched. A toothbrush sat dry in the cup by the sink. The next morning, Mo's name wasn't on the unit board. It was as if he had never existed. In the laundry wing, work resumed under strict supervision. The machines thumped and rattled. Steam rose. The smell of detergent fought against the smell of human bodies packed too tightly for too long. A cart rolled past a row of industrial washers, pushed by an older inmate with steady hands and a face that didn't show curiosity. As the cart passed a camera's blind angle, the inmate's fingers slipped underneath a folded sheet, and for half a second, something dark flashed. Laminated plastic. When the cart reached the far end of the row, the older inmate didn't stop. He didn't look around. He simply angled the cart toward a maintenance door that should have been locked. He leaned his shoulder into it. It opened. On the other side, the corridor lights were dimmer, the air colder. The sound of the laundry machines faded until the silence felt heavy. And taped to the inside of the doorframe, secured with a strip of clear packing tape that wouldn't have been available through commissary, was a second prison ID. Not Carver's, not Mo's. A different name, a different inmate number. A photo that matched no one anyone could immediately place. But the authorization code in the bottom right corner was the same one that had approved Carver's impossible transfer, the code belonging to a dead employee. At Red River, someone wasn't just making people disappear. Someone was manufacturing new people to replace them.
By the third day, Red River was no longer reacting to a single disappearance. It was adapting to a pattern. The prison's rhythm, count, chow, yard, work, lights, kept cycling, but it did so like a ship sailing with water in the belly. Every movement felt heavier. Every routine task carried a second purpose: to watch, to measure, to decide which side of the invisible line you were standing on. Men learned to keep their eyes forward and their mouths shut. But even silence became loud when too many people were thinking the same thought. If a man could vanish cleanly and a new identity could be created in his place, then the most dangerous contraband in the building wasn't a weapon, it was a name. In the South Unit, the missing young inmate, Mo Harlan, became a cautionary ghost without anyone needing to say his name out loud. His absence left a vacuum in the tier, and vacuums get filled quickly in prison. His bunk was reassigned, his locker emptied, his laundry tag vanished. By the end of the week, it was as if his spot had always belonged to someone else. That someone else arrived under cover of normal paperwork. A man walked into the unit mid-morning, escorted by 2 officers with neutral faces, holding a mattress roll and a clear property bag. He looked older than Mo, broader in the shoulders, with a thin scar running from his ear to the edge of his jaw. His eyes swept the tier in a slow, practiced pass, taking inventory. The unit board listed him as a transfer from another facility, Luis Santoro. That name meant nothing to most inmates, but to the men who lived inside the prison's hidden economy, the ones who tracked movement the way traders track markets, the name landed like a coin with a strange stamping. It felt too clean, too convenient, too perfectly timed to fill the hole Mo had left. Santoro moved with a quiet confidence that didn't match a disoriented transfer. He didn't ask where the showers were. He didn't hesitate at the day room. He didn't flinch at the constant scanning eyes. He simply found his assigned bunk, Mo's former bunk, and began arranging his belongings with methodical calm, as if he'd rehearsed the motions. Across the tier, men pretended not to stare, but the gangs watched him like a new kind of weather. The Texas Chicano Brotherhood's presence on that tier tightened. A couple of their guys took seats at a table they didn't normally use, adjusting their angles so they could see the new arrival without looking like they were watching. The Paisas didn't rush. They rarely did. Instead, shifts changed in the kitchen and laundry. A cleaning crew was quietly reassigned. Men who normally worked the unit's dull, necessary jobs began to appear in places they didn't usually belong, sweeping, mopping, taking trash bags out with slightly altered routes. The Border Brothers hovered in the negative spaces as always. They didn't need to approach Santoro. Their power came from implication, from the way a rumor could become a weapon without anyone holding it. Santoro didn't seek protection. He didn't seek friendship. He simply existed. And in a prison like Red River, that was a statement. Meanwhile, the service spine, the corridor network behind the prison's public face, became the epicenter of the unspoken hunt. Staff tried to control it with locks and supervision, but Red River wasn't new. Its weaknesses were old, layered, inherited from decades of patchwork expansions. A door might be secured, but its frame might be warped. A camera might record the hallway, but someone might know its blind spot down to the inch. A stamp in a computer might say a man moved, but the computer didn't see the hands that had typed it. And those hands, whoever they belonged to, were moving again. The next signal came from the place no one wanted to talk about: medical. Medical was where men went when they were hurt, sick, or desperate. It was also where paperwork lived, the kind of paperwork that could turn a body into a number, and a number into an identity. On Thursday night, a nurse found a storage cabinet slightly ajar in the triage room. That cabinet had no reason to be open. Inside were bandages, gloves, and a small lockbox that held blank ID laminates. The lockbox sat in its usual spot, but the dust on the shelf had been disturbed, wiped in a rough arc, as if someone had reached in with a sleeve-covered forearm. The lockbox was unlocked. The blank laminates were gone. The next morning, the unit kiosks glitched, briefly, only for a few minutes. Names on the call-out list flickered, scrambled, then returned. Most inmates ignored it. Minor technology hiccups were normal in a place that ran on old wiring and cheap updates. But the men who watched patterns noticed one name appear for half a second and then vanish: Evan Carver. Not under the South Unit, not under segregation, under a new housing assignment that didn't exist: Z Block. In Red River, there was no Z Block. Not on any official map, not in any inmate handbook. Yet the system displayed it as if it had always been there. That night, 2 inmates on a sanitation detail took out trash bins behind the kitchen.
They moved in the slow, bored cadence of routine. The air outside was colder than usual, carrying the smell of fields and distant rain. A floodlight buzzed, flickering over the service yard like an insect. As they rolled the bins toward the compactor, one of them noticed the padlock on a maintenance gate hanging open, swinging slightly in the wind. That gate led to an enclosed, caged area where old furniture and broken equipment were stored, junk that no one cared enough to steal. The lock shouldn't have been open. The men slowed. In prison, curiosity is a controlled substance. It can get you hurt. It can get you dead. But it can also get you leverage. And leverage is the only form of freedom most men ever touch inside prison. They rolled the bins past the gate, then doubled back, eyes down, bodies angled to look casual in the floodlight. One man reached in and pushed the gate wider with the edge of his forearm. Inside the storage cage, the smell was stale. Old wood, rust, damp cardboard. Stacked chairs leaned like tired skeletons. A metal desk sat overturned. The place looked abandoned, until the men saw the new scratches on the concrete floor. Not random scuff marks, drag marks. Heavy, recent, deliberate. They followed them to the back corner, where a large dented industrial refrigerator, an old surplus unit from the kitchen that had supposedly died months ago, sat flush against the wall. It shouldn't have been there. Not in that position, not covering anything. One man crouched and pressed his fingers to the concrete near the fridge base. The floor was colder there, the kind of cold that suggested empty space below. He nudged the fridge lightly. It didn't budge. It had been anchored. The second man, breathing shallow, stepped back and looked upward. Above them, the chain link of the storage cage met a concrete wall that rose to the ceiling. And mounted on that wall, aimed directly at the corner, was a camera. But the camera's small red indicator light was off, disconnected, or disabled. The men stood in silence, feeling the weight of what they were looking at, without naming it. Then, from behind the industrial refrigerator, a sound came. Faint, like metal tapping metal. 3 taps. Pause. 2 taps. A pattern. A signal. Both men froze. Their hearts began hitting their ribs with angry, muffled force. They stared at the fridge as if it might move on its own. The tapping came again, this time accompanied by something else. A voice. Low, hoarse, controlled. Not a scream, not a plea. A statement, delivered like someone who knew exactly how thin the walls were. Don't say my name. The sanitation workers didn't respond. They couldn't. Their throats felt locked. The voice continued, every word edged with exhaustion and certainty. They're making new IDs. A breath. They're trading people. Another pause, long enough to make the air feel heavier. They already replaced one. The men backed away without turning their backs to the fridge, moving like they were stepping away from a bomb that hadn't decided whether to explode. They pushed the gate shut. They rolled the bins forward again as if nothing had happened, hands shaking on the plastic handles. But prison has a way of pulling truth into circulation. By lunchtime, whispers moved through the mess hall like smoke. By evening, the rumor reached the yard. By night, it had threaded its way into every unit in the complex. Some men believed it immediately. Some dismissed it as fear myth, the kind inmates invent to entertain themselves in cages. But then, just before lights out, something undeniable happened. In the South Unit, Luis Santoro, Mo's replacement, stood up from his bunk and walked to the tier's phone alcove. He didn't have a scheduled call. He didn't have phone minutes according to the kiosk. Yet he lifted the receiver anyway and held it to his ear.
For a moment, he listened. Then he spoke, quietly, one sentence. When he hung up, he turned and walked back to his bunk without looking at anyone. His face remained calm, his shoulders loose. But the men who had been watching him, people who knew what normal looked like, felt their stomachs drop. Because Santoro's voice in that single sentence had carried a familiar cadence. Not Moe's, not his own. It sounded like Evan Carver. Later, long after the tears settled into restless sleep, the prison's internal printer in the administrative office ran without being touched. A sheet of transfer paper slid out, warm and crisp. It listed a scheduled external medical transport for the following morning. Inmate name, Luis Santoro. Destination, unknown. Authorization code, the dead employee's ID. And at the very bottom, in a line that wasn't part of any official template, a message appeared, like a signature written by the system itself. Z-Block confirmed. Red River would wake up to another clean disappearance. And somewhere beneath the building, behind a refrigerator that had been anchored like a tombstone, someone was still alive. Counting taps, counting time, waiting to see if the world above would notice the difference. If you thought this one was wild, wait for the next. Hit subscribe so you don't miss what surfaces when the prison thinks nobody's watching.